We're so happy to have Dr. Atwater here. She is one of the premier and first researchers and authors and speakers around this topic. And I'm just going to let her take off because we were just laughing before everybody got on here that I had been calling her the Energizer Bunny, and that's what she calls herself. So we'll just let her go for it. Thank you, Dr. Atwater.
My goodness, well, our topic is the near-death experience and the after effects. And so I want to first of all be very clear about what a near-death experience is, as identified. It's a very intense awareness or sense or experience of otherworldliness, whether pleasant or unpleasant, that happens to people on the edge of death. So not everybody is clinically, physically dead. Some people are close to death. Some people have what is called a fear death. That is to say, they're scared willies, but nothing happens to them per se. And we can have near-death-like experiences. So there's lots of different experiences, but what we know scientifically is no matter how long you are without oxygen or the heart working or the lungs working, we have consistent out-of-body experiences, clear enhanced consciousness, self-identity with emotions, cognition, thought, perception, full use of faculties, and intact memories. That is to say, you're really more alive than you are in your body, because you're more open, you're more expansive, you can cover more scenery, if you will. So when we're talking about a near-death experience, we're talking about something, a particular experience that now is well established. We know for certain these type of experiences happen when people are in crisis, or nearly so. So we have to look at that. The experience and the after effects. You know, we know a lot about the experience now because of Raymond Moody and lots of other people. Let me say for sure, though, that most people never see a tunnel, never go through a tunnel. Only about maybe a quarter of them do. There's a real whole dynamic of different experiences an individual can have. A lot of people are not just met by loved ones, they're met by pets, dogs, cats, horses, lots of birds. I've never figured that one out with both adults and children, lots of birds. But there can be a whole menagerie, not just people that you've known, loved ones and that type of thing. So we know now that this experience is for real. We estimate about 5% of the world's population has had a near-death experience. So we're talking about a lot of people in a lot of different cultures. They will, of course, use different languages, different thought streams to describe it. You know, what a cowboy in Wyoming might call an angel, and a man in Bangkok, Thailand will call him a Yamatuk. I mean, servants of the Lord Yama, who is the Lord of the underworld. So you can have cultural, you can have the culture kind of playing here. People will tend to use those particular words they're more familiar with in various types of cultures. But the way you really get to the heart of it, which I do, is I have the people draw it. Have the fellow in Wyoming draw his experience, have the fellow in Bangkok draw theirs. And invariably, it will be basically the same kind of drawing. That is to say that they're trying to the best of their ability to draw what they saw, and they will be very similar. So again, pay attention to the culture, pay attention to the type of words that people are using. So my job, a lot of people's jobs, is to get beyond that, get beyond your culture and what you think things are, and take a look at what's really happening and the after effects of what's really happening. So let me sort of give you an idea of these kinds of experiences, how broad and how different they can be, and we'll go from there. I had an experiencer in Portland, Oregon. We're talking October. We're talking late into October, the dark of the moon. They had nearly midnight. This is a man, he's driving outside of Portland. There are switchback curves. Driving way out, not many homes, not many lights out there. And there had been a sudden temperature inversion. So all of a sudden, there's a lot of dampness and, out in the Portland, Oregon area, or Oregon itself, especially the closer you get to the coast. So there's a dampness in the air, but with a temperature inversion, all of a sudden, everything's freezing and you have what is called black ice. So the fellow didn't know it was freezing. And so he's just merrily driving along, I suppose having a good time. And all of a sudden, he's driving at a speed that is much too fast for where he is. He loses control of the car on a switchback, crashes into a very, very tall, large, big tree. Very bloody mess. The man lost his right arm, not able to see at all until he's out of his body. Rises out of his body to the top of the tree, looks down, sees the bloody mess, sees his arm, dislocated, cut off from his body. He wants to save his body. That's his thought. I want to save my body. So he looks around for any lights, any people, any houses, and way up on a ridge up yonder, there is one house, lights on in the house. And to use his words, he went over to the house. How he went over there, who knows, but he went over to the house. And the main light was upstairs, right-hand corner. So he's looking inside the window, and inside he's looking at, looking through the window, and inside is this guy. So he starts yelling. He's jumping up and down and yelling at the guy. Call the police. There's been an accident. He keeps saying it again and again. Call the police. There's been an accident. The fellow inside heard him physically.
Wow.
Heard the tones physically.
Cool.
And was looking at the window and noticing all this fog and said, fog doesn't jump up and down. So he was very, very curious, but right away he went to the phone, called the police, grabbed a flashlight, went downstairs, and started looking everywhere for this accident because he had no idea, hadn't heard anything. And finally he was able to flash down and locate the accident. He was there when the emergency crews come. They rushed the fellow to the hospital. Is dead on arrival. And they do the best they can to revive him. They were able to revive him. He was in the hospital, I think, for about 2 or 3 months. You know, really badly damaged, lots of surgery. He did indeed lose his sight. And you know, they were not able to reattach the right arm. Well, this man was a professional artist, right-handed. And toward the end of his time in the hospital, his sight suddenly comes back. So he asks for paper and pens. And with his left hand, he's drawing a picture of the accident scene. They call in the investigating police officer. They call in the man in the house. They look at the drawing. And they say it is so good and so detailed. It is if a photograph of the actual scene. How could he have done that? He was blind. You know, how do you explain that? Let me give you another case. This is Margaret Fields Keene. She was a school teacher. I may be first or second grade, divorced, raising a daughter, really good with gardening, raises horses. She developed phlebitis in both legs, rushed to the hospital. This is an emergency. Rush her to surgery. During surgery, she dies. In her experience, she sees this very green, beautiful world. That is to say, beautiful lawns and trees and bushes. And there's a river running through the landscape. So she walks up to the edge of the river and she hears a voice on the other side. You are to become a healer, even in darkest Africa. And then she comes to, and she's laying on a bed, you know, in the recovery room, and there's a fellow next to her, and he's screaming and crying, and she looks over to him, passes her arm up and down his body, and he quiets himself and goes to sleep. How she did that, we don't know, because she's laying in the bed. And she looks to the end of the recovery room, and there is another room where it's all black. The windows are all blacked out, black curtains. Nobody is talking at all about that room. She had a feeling she had to go in that room. She did. She went right through the wall. She went right through the wall. Sat down on the bed. There was a boy in there, about 7 years old. Her words, white boy burned black. So we've got a major burn victim here. And he is dying. So she sits on the edge of his bed. He can see her perfectly. He can hear her perfectly. She introduces herself. She talks about death. That is easy to die, what death is like. And he's very concerned about his parents. He doesn't want to leave his parents. So she talks about that, and that it's going to be all right. And it's going to be all right to die. You don't have to fear it. You don't have to worry about your parents. And then she left. A month later, she's out of the hospital, and she's now in a wheelchair. She's at a horse show. Her daughter is showing one of her horses. Of course, she's in a wheelchair. Her daughter won. So in the loudspeaker, they're blasting out the daughter's name and that she is the daughter of Margaret, you know. And then you hear this scurry hurry of two people trying to get to see Margaret, a man and a woman. They finally got to her, and said that they were the parents of the boy. Remember, the boy knows her name. So the parents know to find Margaret. And they told Margaret all about what the son went through, that he had an easy death, and that he had assured his parents before he died that all would be well. He's going to be fine. They don't have to worry about him. And how grateful they are that Margaret could have spent that time with their son, you know, no fear, and how grateful they were. Well, how do you explain that? You know, this is physical. We're not talking intuition here. We're not talking psi. These people heard each other physically. They see each other physically. Let me give you some other cases here. We're just getting good. Let me give you hot shots from hell. Hot shots are firefighters. This is either Arizona, New Mexico. There is a whole team of them. I think about 25, and they were on a mountaintop, and the fire had spread so far so fast that there was no way they could get down off the mountaintop. The fire was all around them coming up. So they did what firemen do. They pull out their blankets, special blankets, and cover themselves. And all of the oxygen then is sucked out of the area. A fire creates its own weather, and the first thing it does is suck out oxygen. So all of these men, they were all men, were all covered. And for some time, when a rescue crew came up, they knew that they were there, and got the men off the mountain into hospitals. And when investigators went room to room to room talking to all these people, they all told the same story. They all saw themselves leave their bodies. They saw themselves up above their bodies. And one of them, Jose, was crippled. And when the crew boss saw him, on the other side, he kept saying, Jose, look at your foot. You're not crippled. And his foot was perfect. So they all went on and had their individual experiences and came back. So the investigative crew, special investigators, heard this from each one of them, and each had the same story. You know, they all saw each other on the other side fully. You get this a lot in war scenes with our soldiers. This one particular band in let's see, where was this? Vietnam. And this particular squad was, all guys were killed, all of them except this one fellow, and he nearly died. And I spoke a lot with the head nurse, and she said that the man was very, very upset. They were doing everything they can to repair repair him in every way possible. But he's so upset, and he's upset. Well, he has survivor's guilt. You know, he's the only one that survived. What about the other people, his buddies? And so he talks about on the other side with the buddies. And they all said to him, you did not agree to this. We all agreed to die together. You didn't. You have to go back. You're not part of the agreement. So here this guy has survivor's guilt. You know, he came back, the others didn't. You run into this kind of thing very often in war scenes, where the people who leave, many of them had agreed to leave. That is to say, agreed somehow with their soul, with God, with whomever. They agreed to leave. But the other fellow did not. We have all kinds of cases. Let me give you one more, and that's George Rodaniah. George Rodaniah lived in Tbilisi, Georgia, and he was a communist dissident at a time when that wasn't cool. And he was a doctor. He was well known in the area. His daughter, or excuse me, his wife, his daughter and son were able to make it out of Tbilisi and go to Moscow, where they would take a plane to Texas. A particular church had agreed to take them in. And George then was to follow the family. So he had most of the luggage and everything. He's waiting on the curb for the taxi cab. Well, unfortunately for George, the taxi cab was driven by the KGB. Not only did they not pick him up, they ran over him again and again and again. He was taken to the hospital, dead on arrival. They put him in a freezer. Now, it's true we don't know the temperature of that freezer. We have no way of knowing. He was in that freezer for 3 days. Because he was so well known, they had to do an autopsy. So they finally pulled him out, took him to the autopsy room. His own uncle was one of the surgeons in the autopsy room.
I can't wait to hear the rest of the story.
I know.
I have a question. Does anybody know what a switchback? Yeah, wait a minute. What a switchback is on the road? When she talked about the
Yeah, it's with the mountains, and there's like hairpin turns.
I thought that's probably what it was.
All right. Hopefully she's not into the next story.
Will she know that she froze?
Well, it seems like, I mean, we certainly do when we're,
Yeah.
Yeah, like the whole thing would go
the
down.
whole thing would just kind of go down, I think.
I don't know, do we send her maybe a, do we have a phone for her yet, or
I think it's a landline.
the one that's busy?
Well,
Intermission.
Wow, look at that.
Charles just had a near-death experience.
okay. I want to do this. There we go. All right.
Are we? Are we
Yep.
really?
Yes, we're back,
Yes.
and you can continue on.
All right, we've all died here with George Rodenaya. Been rushed to the hospital. Dead on arrival. He's at the autopsy table. They're doing what is called the T-cut. That is to say, they're splitting open the bottom part, and then they do a T right up the middle. So I was doing the T. They'd already done the bottom. They were doing the T when he opened his eyes.
Oh my God.
Now that's not necessarily a bad thing. So they closed his eyes and kept cutting. He opened his eyes again. And again, they didn't think, so they just closed his eyes and kept cutting. He opened his eyes a third time. Then the head doctor screamed, took a 1-month vacation, couldn't handle it. And we have the case of George Rodenaya. He was in the hospital for quite a while. The first 3.5 days, he couldn't speak, because when you die, the tongue swells up and closes off the mouth. So I had to wait for the tongue to go down before he could speak. The first thing he did when he spoke was he talked about the baby he saw being delivered in the delivery room. Because many of the things that happened while he died, he saw the death of his parents. He visited a woman in Paris, France. He'd always wanted to go to Paris, France, never did. So he visited her out of body. She kept hearing him, but she couldn't see him. Then he was with his wife when she was picking out a grave site. And while she was picking out a grave site, she was thinking in her mind of 3 different men that might be a future husband, because she had 2 little kids she wanted taken care of. She needed a man. So she's going over all of their traits in her mind. And among the other things he did, a friend of his wife was about to deliver a baby, so he went up to the delivery room, and he was there after the little girl was born. I think it was a girl. The head nurse dropped the child and broke its pelvis. Nobody knew. The child was screaming. So George walked up to the child, spoke to the child. He said that children can, see and communicate perfectly with people who are not wearing bodies. He told the child to be quiet. He would be back with her later. So when he can finally speak, he talked about the child. He says, "Get up there, and help help that child confront that nurse." They did. The nurse admitted she dropped the child, and they were able to repair the break in the pelvis. Then he told his wife all about what he heard and all of the traits of the 3 men she was thinking about when she was trying to pick out his gravesite. And she was so freaked out because he was absolutely accurate everything that she wouldn't have anything to do with him for a year. I talked with her later on when they were in the United States. I was talking to her, and I said, you know, weren't you happy to see your husband back? Wasn't that meaningful to you? And she said, you know, well, yes and no, because she no longer had any privacy. You would always know what was in her mind, and that freaked her out. So the two of them, you know, had to make an agreement to stay together because she couldn't handle it. It was too hard for her. So we have here an arrangement of different types of cases that give you a flavor, at least, for what happens. It's not always a nice pattern that people go through. You're not always met by anyone on the other side at first. So you're not necessarily going through a typical scenario that you've heard about on radio and TV and is written about in most of the books, but especially radio and TV. Because radio, well, not radio so much, but television, they script stories to fit their timeline, you know, to make dollars for their, you know, the sponsor and all this kind of thing. So what you see on television most of the time has been scripted to be that way because of the demands of you know, the sponsorships and television and that kind of thing. So again, it gives you an idea of how it happens when that is not how it usually happens. So you're getting a false idea. And again, the idea of the tunnel, that's not necessarily true at all. Yes, some people see it. Yes. Again, about a quarter of the people who have it, maybe, you know, it depends on the individuals, what they found in their particular research. But if you look at sort of all of us and we put our percentages together, then you find out it's just a little over a quarter that have the tunnel. It's only been really in about the last 15, 20 years that you're hearing so much about individuals coming back, having met their guides, and they're now, you know, they're now a sort of a spokesperson for the other side. And so you get these extreme stories. To begin with, most of us, the first few decades of research, you didn't get the kind of stories you're getting now. So I kind of wonder, are people being influenced a lot by what they've heard and what they've read? Let me give you one more case before we talk more about after effects and how people can be impacted. This is a woman, I think she was in her maybe 29, 30, something like that, maybe 31. She's out in farmland country, she's driving along, and she's hit by, at an intersection, she's hit by a truck traveling the other way very fast, hits her, you know, right in the driver's side, and she's, by the time they were able to get the crews there and get her to a hospital, she's dead on arrival. So they did what they could to bring her back. They did bring her back. They're working on her, and all of a sudden, eyes open, she's talking very animatedly, and you know, it's hard for the doctors to sort of control her so that, you know, they can do the surgery. She's very, very animated. She says, my dad, I saw my dad, and he died, and he told me all about his death, and that it was time for him to go, but it's not my time. I have to come back. And she's very animated, talking about her dad. So one of the crew in the operating area go back, and by then a lot of the family had gathered, and so they're talking. He's talking to the family and saying, you know, what's this stuff about the father? You know, died and this kind of thing, and they all say, oh, obviously, yeah, she's just having a hallucination. The dad is in perfect health, and several of them had talked to him that morning. And by telephone that morning, the dad's just fine. So the guy goes back, the surgeon goes back, talks to the woman, you know, there's nothing wrong with your father. He's trying to, you know, settle her down so they can work on her. And she becomes even more animated about her dad. So this time, the doctor is getting rather upset. And so he goes back to the family again and says, get that man on the phone. I want to talk to him. And, you know, phone call in the operating room. I want her to hear her father. So suffice it to say, after many, many phone calls, they find that the father, died 5 minutes before the daughter did, in exactly the same way the father described he had a heart attack. Again, how do you explain that? 5 minutes. How could she have known? She was in the hospital. I mean, she was in surgery. How could she know? So when we're talking about near-death cases, many of them are simple. Just quick in and out of the body. Many of them involve different scenes, talking to loved ones who have died and come back, talking to their pets. Some of them are very complicated. In my own research, I found what I feel are four distinctive types. The first one I call the initial experience. It's something like the friendly dark, or a loving voice, or a quick out-of-body experience. That's all it is. But it really changes an individual. There's the unpleasant or hellish or frightening experience. In my research base, 1 out of 7 had that type. There's the pleasant or heavenly experience. Not even 50% have this, at least in my research. There is what I call the transcendent experience. With your with your frightening or really pleasant experiences, that's where you have most of the life reviews. You don't have it with the initial. Seldom do you have it with the transcendent. With the transcendent, those are usually really deep. They have to do with the makings of creation, what happens to the world. These people usually come back really, really filled with the need to make a difference in the world in some specific way. So very energized to do that. So those are the 4 that I came across. With the after effects, with everybody, not just me. The most common episode, and I don't want to talk about after effects here so much as I want to talk or express the major components of the near-death experience. The number 1 is out of body experiences. Most people have an out of body experience. Not everybody, but most do, child or an adult, doesn't matter. The second most occurring is that incredible light. And the children say there are 3 types of light. There's this just raw, piercing, wow light. Adults usually describe it as so bright and so powerful, you are fried. Instantly, you're fried, but there's no pain. I love how they describe it. Wow, kind of light. And then after that, usually, let's see, after the light and meeting up with beings on the other side, and then the life review. Not all of them are pleasant. Sometimes they can be really difficult. And then that transcendent part. With those that are difficult, when we're looking at how difficult they can be, some of them, you're kind of detached. You're learning from the experience what you did right, what you wish you hadn't done, what you learned from. This particular man in Chicago that I met, his particular life review in his experience, he was kind of like a gangster type. So in his life review, all of the people he'd ever hurt, he went through what they went through. Every pain they suffered because of him, he suffered. And then any relative or friend of theirs that were hurt or affected by that individual's pain, he had to go through that pain too. So he got a double decker in pain. And when I met him, he was serving food to the poor. And he said he could never go back to the life he had before. This was, his way of sort of making up for everything that he had done that had hurt people. So, you get a lot of these, but the after effects, look, I gotta tell you, it's the after effects that validate the experience, not the other way around. It's the after effects that you see how it affects people. They please please bear with me because that's kind of a little rattling, so I'm getting unrattled. So when we're talking about the after effects, it takes the average adult 7 to 10 years to integrate the after effects. Do you hear that? 7 to 10 years. No one does it quicker. And I've met a lot of people who claim they did. And they go through a different classes and teachings, and they've taken all these classes and spiritual and all this kind of stuff, and they've been able to integrate their experience. Nope. Get me around. I'm watching. I'm in the family. I'm in the home. I'm talking to the family, and no, they're not completely better, but they're not completely integrated. Take 7 to 10 years minimum. The average child experiencer, 20 to 40 years.
Wow.
Let's be serious here. A child does not integrate. They compensate. So if you're a child experiencer, especially from birth to age 5, maybe even to age 7, it's going to take you a long time for this to really play out in your mind, for you to be able to handle this, for you to be able to even know what it is, why you're so different. You don't know why you're so different. Please, 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 if you're a child experiencer, get the book, my latest book, The Forever Angels, Near-Death Experiences in Childhood and Their Lifelong Impact. Children, if you're a child experiencer, you will not have the same impulses and the same after effects as an older child, teenager, or an adult. Your case will be remarkably different, even if you, from birth to the age of 5, remember these young ones, there's no before. With the older ones, you can make comparisons before and after. With the young ones, there's no before. So it's an entirely different type of case. So let's take a look again at the after effects. Main ones, well, you hear all the time. Not afraid of death anymore. I'd say you're like 99.9% of them. There's a few that come back that are still afraid of death, but most of them, nope. So certainly that. They become calmer. Life is easier in the sense of often their prayer, meditation, medium get into healing. It's like stress is much easier to handle afterward for them. A lot of them go into with adults, a lot of them go into the ministry. With children, a lot of them go into science. Different, yeah. Invariably, the average near-death experiencer comes back smarter than they were before. With children, way smart. But we won't get into the children with this one, with tonight, because that would be a whole different talk. But certainly more loving, more patient, usually. The physiological after effects, you don't hear much about those, but they're extremely important. That is to say, there are structural changes in the brain. You simply do not speak and talk the same way you did before. There are structural changes in brain structure and brain chemistry. There are changes in the digestive system, skin sensitivity, the nervous system. They are definitive changes. Most of them come back with electrical sensitivity, I'm one of them. Yeah, well, blew the equipment here. Don't know how that happened, but you know. And yes, I cannot wear watches. Some do. Most of those that are able to wear watches, it's solar watches rather than regular batteries. Make sure they're solar powered batteries. You can wear them a lot easier then. Be careful what you eat. I want to give medical notes here. Medical notes. Usually, lower blood pressure afterward, less aging. There's a difference in aging afterward. Light sensitivity, sound sensitivity. Many times you can pop light bulbs. All kinds of things can happen with light. I've certainly had a lot. I'm sure many of you have too. You can pop light bulbs all over the place. When you walk by a television set, it'll change channels. You didn't do anything. You just walk by the TV set and whoop, change channels. Many of us turn to homeopathy. Many of us turn to doctors like osteopaths. Go more for a more natural healing because you can't handle pharmaceuticals anymore. That's a biggie, especially with children. Be careful with a child experiencer because children are drugged according to age and weight. If a child had a near-death experience, that's a whole different scene. One particular case that I had, this woman was a nurse. She'd had a near-death experience at the age of 7. It was a drowning. Lots and lots and lots of drownings with children for some reason. But, 7. And she was having problems with I forget what the problem was. She was having problems with her doctor. And they took her to Johns Hopkins. And that doctor, bless his heart, I've never been able to find his name. But he knew his stuff. And in the workup, one of the questions he asked her was, did you ever have a near-death experience? This is so important for medical people to ask because they will know right away if they did have a near-death experience. You have to change how you medicate them. So she said, yes, she did. He wanted to know about the experience. And so he gave her the weakest, lowest dosage of the particular medication she needed. And in other words, less than he would even give a child. And because he did that, in the morning, she was just fine. They could release her from the hospital. We've got a lot of attention now on medicating near-death experiencers. Please be careful with medication. Talk to your doctor. Through Johns Hopkins, there's a lot of information coming out now about near-death experiencers. They really are different. One of the things that I talk about with experiencers, please, one of the first things afterward, relearn how to think and how to speak. Number 1, relearn how to think and how to speak. because your mind is different, and you're often challenged with how to say what you want to say. Well, you don't know words. So if you relearn that, one of the best lessons that I've ever come across, it used to be the Science of Mind. Now they've changed their name, Centers for Spiritual Living. Science of Mind 1, where they teach you how to do affirmative prayer. They call it spiritual mind treatments. That's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful way to relearn how to think and how to speak. Highly recommended if you can get it anywhere. That will make such a difference. In another one, this is kind of odd, but I'm going to tell you anyway. Most near-death experiencers wake up between 3 and 4 in the morning. Yeah, not just to go potty. When we're looking at between 3 to 4 in the morning, that's where the melatonin levels peak in the pineal gland, affects the conversion of light waves into energy. Deeper functions of the pineal peaks, the production of DMT, the spirit molecule, happens during that time. That's when the Schumann waves, the base frequency of Earth, called Earth's heartbeat, peaks. That's when most crop circles all over the world happen. Medically, it's called the hour of the wolf. That's associated with congestive heart failure and all kinds of serious diseases. Creatively, it's called the hour of the muse. That's a great time for inspiration, uplifting ideas, innovative art, and understanding. And of course, 4 a.m. is the first prayer of the day for Muslims. So 3 to 4 a.m., yeah, that's a big one for us. Before we switch to questions, here's another big one. I would like to talk about all this kind of stuff. Well, anyway, let's stay with what's at hand. Most near-death experiences come back loving, more loving, love, 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 love. They're talking about unconditional love. And they talk about that often. They come back more loving, more giving. And I'm noticing my little place is falling apart. Maybe me too, who knows? Anyway, this puzzle of unconditional love. It is a puzzle. Did you ever notice that near-death experiencers have all kinds of challenges with love afterward? The divorce rate of the average, the divorce rate is between 71 to 80% within 5 to 7 years afterward. Sky high, much higher than the national average. We're talking about, this is really a big deal. You come back more loving, yet you seem to drive people away. One of the things I talk a lot about is the first rule of discipleship. The average near-death experiencer wants to be on a mountaintop or your rooftop, and they want to shout, God is, death isn't. Because for sure. This is the truth. God is, death isn't. The first rule of discipleship, remember? Don't freak the natives. then they'll hang you. But the puzzle of unconditional love, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. This is a man, he's in his early 40s, married twice, with a second marriage, had 2 children, very happily married. He's a real estate agent and has a near-death experience. When I talk to him, he's talking about, oh, he just feels so loving. He loves everybody. He just loves everybody more than he thought he could ever love. He loves his wife more, his children more, his colleagues more. And, it goes on and on and on. I hear from the same man a year later. And he says, I don't understand this. My wife doesn't want to be around me. My children don't want to be in the same room with me. I'm driving away my customers and my coworkers. I feel more loving than I've ever been. Yet people are turning away from me, and I don't know why. He walked out on his home, never to return. Don't know what happened to the man. Let me give you another example. This is a woman, I believe, in Arkansas, married, again, 2 kids. Her husband is a minister. And this was a Sunday, I was talking to her. And she said she makes all kinds of excuses about why she can't come to church and be with him, and she stays home with the kids and so forth and so on. And I said, why? Why can't you be with your husband in church? And she said, because I know he's lying. It's not that way. She didn't want to divorce him. I don't know how long they stayed together. I don't know what happened to that couple. But this is a real thing, the puzzle of unconditional love. After you have a near-death experience, every woman you see is your aunt, your mother, your daughter. Every man you see is your father, your uncle, your husband, your brother. And it's not that you can't tell people apart. You just love them all. They don't understand that at all. Let me give you an example of my daughter. Remember, I'm a near-death experiencer too. I had 3 in 3 months. I call it the heavenly sledgehammer effect. It took a sledgehammer to, turn me around. Well, anyway, my oldest daughter, afterward, came over to me one time in the kitchen, and I come from Idaho. We're Westerners, and we tend to be rather blunt. And she, put out the pointer finger, and she said, "Well, you're friendlier now than you used to be, and I like talking to you, but you're not Mom, and I want Mom back." Well, we spent years looking for that woman, never did find her. So let's talk about the puzzle of unconditional love. Children want to be privy. They want to be, they want to feel, that they're special to you. Your husband or your wife wants to feel like they're intimate, that intimacy. They don't want to feel like, you love everybody. They want you to love just them. so that they get things rather mixed up. So let's talk about the puzzle of unconditional love. Unconditional love is agape. It's God's love. It's love for everyone. Do you hear that? Love for everyone. Not just singling out one person or another. You have the same love for everyone. That confuses other people tremendously. The puzzle of unconditional love. It can be just as wonderful as it can be horrible. When we're looking at near-death experiences, we're really looking at that 7 to 10 years. And the first years are the most difficult, I think. Difficult in that you're feeling wonderful. You can do all these things. I mean, if you weren't psychic before, you're psychic afterward. If you were psychic before, you're very psychic afterward. Many times you're able to see the energy of plants and trees and people and the soul and out into the cosmos. And yes, all of that is true. And things come to you and you're so gifted and you're so wonderful and you're so loving. All of that's true. But how do you live with it on a daily basis? It's a real challenge. Like my daughter, Natalie. We searched and searched for that woman, her mother. I never found her. It can be just as much of a burden to your family as it can be a freeing, wonderful trip for you. So how do we get it all together? That's one of the things we do in IANS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. When they have their conferences, almost always we have speakers for the family, to help the family listen without any judgment to the experiencer's experience. And very often the family is healed or helped or enlightened or uplifted when they're able to do that. So that makes a huge difference. The near-death experience, well, you know, hey, what we can learn from near-death experiences, yes, there is no death. Absolutely, there is no death. You go on to something else. I'm going to adjust my glasses here. Only the scenery changes at death. You don't. Many see departed loved ones, pets, birds, angels. Light can predominate. You know, we've got the white bright, the dark black, or power light that's impossible to describe. We are all more capable, smarter than we think we are. You come back smarter than you were before. A mind is endless, only thoughts limited. Everyone is psychic. Yep, get this. Everyone is psychic, creative, inventive, loved. Life is worth its living. There's a central source of existence. Some call this God, Allah, or hundreds of other names for deity. All healing is all healing is based on the willingness to change. I say it again. All healing is based on the willingness to change. You get that? So is forgiveness. Prayer is real and it works. Children see prayer as a bright or rainbow banded light that passes from sender to receiver. Love is the only standard that exists because it's the glue that keeps the cosmos together. It's glue. It's energy. I don't know what you want to call love. We can invent all kinds of words. And love is the only standard. Choice is the only process. So, we've got all these ideas, and that's the truth.